Hi, I'm Megan, and I'm one of the educators here at the Flint River Aquarium in Albany, Georgia. And today I'm going to be talking to you about saving our species. All right, so let me share my screen real quick. All right, so we're going to be talking about saving our species and how you are able to help. All right. So, what exactly is a species? A species is a group of similar organisms that are able to reproduce with each other. So, tigers are a species and they are able to reproduce within themselves to make different tigers and have more. And the same thing with sea turtles. There's different types of sea turtles, but this is a loggerhead, and so different loggerheads are able to reproduce and have more loggerhead babies. And then this is also the American chestnut tree, which is a threatened tree here in America due to the chestnut blight. And so it's very difficult for the chestnut to be able to grow to full size due to that blight. It gets in the bark because when it grows to a certain diameter or roundness of the trunk, the bark starts to crack. And so the blight is able to get in there and harm the tree. So the goal of saving our species is to maximize the number of threatened species that are secure in the wild for 100 years. So what this means is that of all the threatened species that are in the wild, we want to secure and protect them for 100 years, because if we protect our threatened species for a long period of time, their populations are able to increase, meaning there's more of them in the wild because the adults are having more babies and the babies are surviving and are able to reproduce and have babies of their own. So by securing them for 100 years, we should be able to get multiple generations of species. So multiple generations would be like the grandmother, the mother, and the child. So by having all that, we also increase genetic diversity because there's more animals within that species out there, which is really good for creating new adaptations and being able to survive different illnesses and diseases. And this way to do this is to control threats facing our threatened plants and animals. And so here I have a picture of a bunch of baby loggerhead sea turtles. And what's really cool with sea turtles is they reproduce at what seems like a really old age to us, but they live a lot longer than we do. So it's actually really young in their lifetime. They reproduce at around 25 to 30 years old, depending on the species and the individual. And they can lay up between 1 and 6 nests every year, or not every year, when they do reproduce. So a female will lay eggs every 2 to 3, or lay nests every 2 to 3 years. And every 2 to 3 years, it'll be between 1 and 6 different nests that she is able to lay. And within those nests, it can range on average. So usually between 50 and 150 eggs, but they have seen some nests that have as few as 12 eggs and as many as 200. Isn't that a lot? And so what we've been doing with a lot of sea turtle conservation is we've been talking to fisheries people. So people who like do the shrimp trawler boats, we have them implement these things in their nets called TEDs, which are turtle exclusion devices. So they're little holes that are big enough for the turtles to swim out of and not get trapped and end up drowning, because turtles breathe air and oxygen. So they have to come to the surface of the water to breathe because they're reptiles and not fish. So they don't have those gills. And another thing that we do is we monitor the nest. And so I did this last summer on Sapelo Island off of the coast of Georgia, and I was their sea turtle technician. And what I would do is I would go up and down the beach every single day looking for more nests. And when I found a nest, I would if my paper said to relocate it, because where I was the control for the study. So I was told if I relocate it, all the other islands will relocate it if it's going to get covered by the tide, because if it gets covered by the water, it prevents or it causes them to not hatch as many. And if it gets covered multiple times, it can cause that entire nest not to hatch. So sometimes we help out the mama turtle so she doesn't pick a very good site, and we move the nest for her. And so I would dig up the nest and move it to a better location, like a really good one where we know they're going to be able to hatch and not get covered by the tide. And it's not too far away, because if it's really far away, the babies would have a hard time getting to the ocean. So we would relocate the nest, and I would take one egg from every nest. That way we can do genetic testing to see who that mother is and see which beaches she goes to, and how often she nests and how many nests she lays each year that she does lay nests. And then after the incubation process, which can be between 60 and 100 days, somewhere in there, there's a range, and sometimes it's a little more, sometimes it's a little less, depending on temperature and rain and just our environmental factors. I will go and dig up the nest and see how many eggs actually hatched, which tells us how many hatchlings hopefully made it to the ocean. And I also had to like monitor around just in case like some got lost in the sand dunes, or a ghost crab or raccoon or something or a bird got to it. And so I would see how many hatched, how many didn't hatch, because there are some eggs that don't get fertilized. And then I would also see if there were any dead hatchlings in there that just had a birth defect or something, and they weren't able to crawl out of the nest. And sometimes there were live hatchlings still in there. So I would count how many live hatchlings there were and go and release those, which was really awesome. And so by doing that, we're able to see our nest success and recruitment, which is what scientists call more babies being put into the population. So I would get all those numbers, and we would be able to see how many new hatchlings were recruited into the population and are hopefully going to survive and make it to adulthood and then mature and be able to reproduce in the future. And within a single nest, only about 10% of those hatchlings will survive to maturity and be able to reproduce. And so this helps with biodiversity. And what is biodiversity? It is where there's a wide variety, which means there's lots and lots of different species and organisms within their environment and how they interact with each other. And the more biodiversity there is, the healthier our ecosystem is, because each animal and organism, plant, bacteria plays a role, and they interact with each other and help each other out. And so with our water aquatic areas, we have beavers, which are our ecosystem engineers, and they will build dams and flood areas, which create more space for fish, and which is area for them to fish and get their food. But otters will also utilize this, because river otters eat the same fish that the beavers do. And by the beavers increasing the area, there's more area for the otters to eat and fish. And then eagles, they also eat fish. So they'll go and down into the water when there's a fish at the surface and pick it up and take it away and eat that as well. So they all interact with each other. And the fish, they eat the aquatic algae and plants and smaller fish and phytoplankton. And so they all interact with each other. And it's just a whole big web of interactions. And the more that there are, the more species and organisms in there, the more opportunities for different species to stay healthy and continue to live and reproduce and be there for our future. That way, in 10 years, 20 years, 50 years down the road, they're still there and we can still go out and see them. And so I have a video to show you here. And so this is of a gopher tortoise. And what's cool about gopher tortoises is that they are called a keystone species, which means they are so important to their environment and their habitat because they help other species. And so they dig burrows. They use their big feet up front and claws to dig a burrow. And what's really cool about their burrows is they can be 30 feet long and 10 feet deep. And they live in the longleaf pine wiregrass ecosystem, which is regularly maintained by fire. It has adapted to fire, and so has the gopher tortoise since it's found in this ecosystem. And we help Mother Nature by doing prescribed fire about every 3 years. Sometimes it's 2 years, sometimes it's 5 years. It just depends when we can get around to it. But we try to keep it on average at a 3-year interval because that's on average when Mother Nature would have a wildfire and would burn those ecosystems. And so the trees are adapted to the fire. The understory of grasses and forbs, which the gopher tortoise eats, are adapted to fire and will have better seed reproduction if it has fire in the spring rather than in the winter. There's lots of other species that will utilize these burrows as well, up to over 300 other species. So that's a lot, just 300, and there's more than that. And one of the big species that will utilize the gopher tortoise burrow is the indigo snake. And the eastern indigo, will help control rattlesnake populations because it eats rattlesnakes, which is really cool. And it'll also eat small rodents. And then we also have gopher frogs, which will eat insects, and they use the burrows. So lots and lots of different animals will use these burrows that the gopher tortoise digs. And the gopher tortoise can live in there with the other animals. And sometimes they'll dig a burrow, live there for a few years, and move on to a different burrow. So they create multiple different burrows and lots of different species because some species will live in it with the tortoise while others don't. So let's go ahead and watch this video. So this is Ernest, and he's just on his walk and he's eating a lot of the grasses and forbs. Just having a little snack while he was out on his walk. And one of the gopher tortoise's favorite little snacks is the prickly pear cactus. So you'll see a lot of gopher tortoises in sandhill areas with that. That's the soil type in these longleaf wiregrass ecosystems is sandy soils. And a lot of times prickly pear cactus will grow there. And it's really hard on the outside with all the prickles and spines and really thick skin. But once you get on the inside, the fruit is really juicy and yummy. And so the gopher tortoise really enjoys that. And so why is biodiversity important? It's because the loss of biodiversity can negatively impact our air and water quality, and it can lead to pollution. And then it affects our pollination and pest control as well. So bats, like this one here, is an insectivore. So it helps with pest control because it's eating a grasshopper, and grasshoppers will eat our plants and our crops. And so he'll also eat moths and mosquitoes. And you ever get a bug bite from a sand gnat or a mosquito? It doesn't feel good. It itches really bad. And so their populations would get really, really large if we didn't have bats and birds to eat these insects and knock the population back down. And then other bats will eat nectar, as well as bees and butterflies. So when a bee and butterfly or a bat goes to one flower and then moves to another one, it helps with the pollination by moving that pollen around. And so that's really, really cool. And then air quality and water quality, you can tell water quality by what species are in that water. So the eastern hellbender, he's really sensitive to pollution, so he needs really clear, cool streams to live in. So if you have a hellbender, you know that water is really, really clear and healthy. There's no pollution in it, no bad things that'll harm you. And you can also see your little invertebrates. There's different species of little invertebrates that are teeny tiny and really hard to tell. And there's lots of different species of those. And depending on what species you find in that water system, can tell you if it has bad quality or if it's like in the middle or if it's really, really good, like what the hellbender enjoys. So, what makes a species threatened? There's lots of different things, and this isn't a list of everything, but a decrease in population size. So, when their populations start going down, 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 it means that a lot of the adults are dying. And if you don't have adults, you don't have reproduction, which means you don't have that recruitment we were talking about earlier with the sea turtles. So, we don't have that recruitment of babies into the population, so there's less maturing and reproducing, and it just starts going downhill and downhill. And with conservation efforts and protecting the adults that and the babies so they can get to adulthood, it'll start to go back up. And so there's also changes in geographical distribution and habitat quality. And a big factor of this is habitat fragmentation. So we live in very urban and suburban areas where our houses are. It used to be where animals lived. And so when we put our houses there, the animals are moved out and they get dislocated. They have to find somewhere else to go, and that can be difficult because where they're moving, there's already an animal there. And when two animals who fill the same role or niche, the niche is the role the animal plays within that ecosystem. If there's the same animal there, that can cause problems, and they might fight and harm each other. One may end up dying because it can't find somewhere to make a home where because animals need space, water, food, and cover. And if it can't find all those, then it's not going to be able to survive. And then sensitivity to human activities such as fishing. Fishing is a huge problem because we do create, or law enforcement creates regulations. And if we follow these regulations, our water systems and fisheries are great and safe and healthy. But some people don't pick up their litter. Like if their line gets lost, they don't try to find it and reel it back in and like save their hooks and things. They just let it go, which is really bad because wildlife becomes entangled in it. If you take fish that are too small, that means they don't have the chance to grow up and get bigger and reproduce. So you're taking our future parents out of the ecosystem, and that reduces our population size. So you're starting to see how it's all tied together. And then number of mature individuals in the wild. So if we're going after the big mature ones that are our parents, then who's going to create the babies? So we have to protect the ones that are actively reproducing. That way we continue to have that recruitment into the population. And some of the things you can do is talk to your local park ranger if you have a state park or a national park near you. You can go to the park ranger and talk to them about any locally threatened species, whether it be plants or animals within that park, and see how they are working to protect them. And you can always ask the ranger if there's volunteer opportunities to work with them for preserving these species, because a lot of times with plants, they're going out and they're doing a method called hack and squirt, where it's the Chinese tallow tree. It's not native to America. And it is really vigorous, which means it grows really fast and really quick and really big. So what they do is they will take a little hatchet and like hit a notch out of it and then spray a chemical in there to help kill the Chinese tallow, because that's not native. It's taking up space for our native species, and that's one way we can protect our plants. And you can go and volunteer with park rangers. I'm sure they would love to have help doing that because it is a difficult job. And they can also teach you about the native flora and fauna, plants and animals that are found in that park as well. So how we can help. You can plant native plants in your garden and yard instead of invasive species. Like some people love to plant mimosas because they get really pretty, they smell really good, but they're not native here in Georgia. So instead of planting a mimosa tree, you can plant a southern magnolia tree, or you can plant a pine tree. There's lots of options for native trees. And then you can also pick native fruiting trees. That way you can help our animals that are frutivores that prefer to eat fruits. So we have certain birds, bats that prefer to eat just fruit. So you can help these animals by getting native fruit, and you're also helping our plants and our ecosystems by getting native plants as well. Don't release pets into the wild. You have a pet snake and he got really, really big, find a zoo or a local animal store, and they can help you find resources to take that animal to. A big problem is people have been releasing their pet snakes into the Everglades in Florida. And because of the temperature and weather in Florida, it's really good for snakes to breed and grow. And so the Burmese python is a big problem in Florida because it gets so big it can eat a whole alligator, which are really big animals. And this snake is able to eat that. And they eat deer and they eat rabbits, and they're just decimating and hurting our native animals in Florida because people are like, oh, my snake's too big, instead of finding somewhere responsible to take it or being responsible pet owners and owning it for its entire lifetime. They're just like, oh, well, it can live in the wild, which is not very good for the wild animals, and it hurts them. By following hunting and fishing regulations, by only keeping the certain number of animals and fish that they say you can have. So if your state says you can only take 2 turkeys during turkey season, only take 2. And if they say it can only be a male, only get a male, don't get a female, right? Because the females are the ones who reproduce. And if they are like, you can only have a fish that is 12 inches long, you have to measure that fish, because if it's 11.9 or if it's 12.1, that's not legal. And we always have our game wardens hiding around, and they will check you to make sure you're doing things legally. And you can always talk to them, and they love to do education as well. And they love to talk to you. And sometimes if you're find a really awesome one, they'll give you a little sticker, especially if you're doing a good job of following their hunting rules and fishing rules and everything. And if you don't litter, that's a big one. Picking up your litter or random litter that you see, and as long as you don't throw it out in the wild, find a garbage can, find a dumpster, something to put it there. Because a big problem, like here, you can see that this is a fishing net that this seal got caught in. You can see it's digging into its neck. That's not comfortable. It can dig in and cause cuts, which can get infected, and the infection makes the animal sick. It can also cut off the airflow, and the animal won't be able to breathe. If it's tight enough, the animal won't be able to eat, and it'll starve. So there's lots of problems with pollution, and we're us littering and not being able to pick it up. And if we see someone else litter, go pick it up and throw it away for them, because they might not know any better. Reuse and recycle whenever possible. By reusing things, it's getting multiple purposes and multiple uses instead of just being used once and thrown away. And then if it's like plastic, you can recycle that instead of just throwing it away, because when it gets thrown away, it takes a really, really long time to break down and get back to the basic products that it was created from. And so by recycling it, it goes and it gets turned into something new and better and can be used again. So that's great for our environment. It reduces the amount of trash in the landfill, along with composting. So here, composting is great, especially if you have a garden. And you can take your potato peels, your tomatoes, eggshells, all your organic stuff like fruits and vegetables that kind of matter. Just don't put any meat, because meat has a different pH and acidity, and it can change the compost and can be harmful to your plants and yard if you were to spread it there. And it'll break down over time, and you can get worms and add worms to that to help expedite the process and make it go faster. And it'll turn into this compost, and it's really good fertilizer for your garden and everything. So I have another video here. So going back to our species diversity, this is a two-tailed amphibia, which is a type of salamander. And in a minute, I'll show you a different type of salamander, but we're just going to see how like the same type and group of animal can have a wide variety, which is really cool. So you can see his little foot right there. He only has 2 toes. That's why he's called two-toed amphibia. And he's an aquatic salamander, whereas some salamanders like to stay in the water more and others will live on land. And that was the last of this. So let me, how do I stop sharing? All right. And so I'm going to pull out this other little guy who's really cool. And so this is a marble salamander. You see how he looks different from the two-toed amphibia? Yeah, so he is a terrestrial or land salamander, and he looks a lot different. And so he prefers to live in mud or under trees and stumps and logs. That way it's a more moist environment. And that's why we have this paper towel in here to keep him nice and moist, because it helps him breathe. Because he is an amphibian, so he will breathe through his skin. And having that moisture there really helps with that. But as you can see, he has black and white, which is why he's called marble. And they can get a little bit bigger than this. He's just a baby. They can get up to 5 inches long, which is still a lot smaller than that amphibia I just showed you. All right. So now I'm going to show you another animal that's really cool, and I really like her. So this is Compass. She is a map turtle, and she gets the name map turtle because you can see all the lines on her. It kind of looks like the lines on a topographic map. If y'all are in the woods, you can use a map, and the lines will show you how steep a slope is going to be, like that angle, that incline. So that's where she gets her name from, for being a map turtle. She's really active right now. She has a really good habitat here. And you can find map turtles in the wild. And so there's lots of different species of turtles. There are sliders and box turtles and soft shells. So this goes back to our diversity thing that we were talking about, biodiversity, having lots of different animals. And she is peeing all over my desk. But she lives with a slider. So they live together, but they fill different roles in the wild, which is really cool and really good for a healthy environment. All right. So does anyone have any questions? No? All right. Well, I hope y'all have a great day.